if you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
Welcome to CN Live, episode 20 of season 2, Voter Suppression. I'm Joe Loria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News.
And I'm Elizabeth Voss.
Our guest today is Greg Palast, a man who's made a career out of figuring out how American political parties suppress the vote in various dirty ways. Greg is I would say, a hybrid social critic, humorist, investigative, private investigator, and a deadly serious journalist who in the early 1990s started working for the BBC and the Observer newspaper in Britain after he had been an investigator for the federal government and labor unions. His work led to one of the government's largest ever racketeering cases against the Long Island Power Company. It won $4.8 billion from a jury. He's a University of Chicago graduate. Greg started making his mark in this field in the 2000 Florida election, the one we all remember, the one that went to the Supreme Court to be decided. And this one, we're going to ask Greg about that. This one might go there, which was one of the reasons Trump pushed to have Amy Coney Barrett go on the court in case this goes to the Supreme Court. She now has a 6-3 majority there. And of course, Bush had a narrower majority, but it got him elected over Al Gore. And Greg went down to Florida, and he discovered all of the dirty tricks that the president's brother had played to keep the vote down, the Democratic vote down, to help his brother win that state, which indeed delivered him the election. We'll stop there with the introduction. Craig, thank you very much for joining us on CN Live. How are you today?
Okay, well, the one thing I'm going to do is plug my book.
Yes, I forgot. Let me go back. Yeah, he's the author
There it is.
He's the author of several books, including Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, which I reviewed for Consortium News back in 2011 when we met somewhere for breakfast in Manhattan. You might remember, Greg, when we talked about your book. And his latest book is T4** Stole 2020. So now let me introduce Greg Palast, and please talk more about your book right now if you want at this point. What is your book saying about this election? Why do you conclude that Trump is going to steal this?
Right. Well, because Trump has already stolen 2020, but we can steal it back. The book, How Trump Stole 2020, that's a warning, not a prediction. Okay. So there's ways to steal it back. And I discuss, well, today, if you go to gregpalast.com or to Leonardo DiCaprio's Instagram story page, you'll see a 13-minute film called The Purged. And this is about how Trump stole the election by his cronies removing millions of voters from the voter rolls on phony, bogus grounds. Now, according to the Elections Assistance Commission, the federal government, and the Brennan Center, they both have the same number. 16.7 million people have been removed from the voter rolls in the past 2 years. A lot of people are going to show up to vote, and they'll be told, sorry, Charlie, you're not here. Here's a provisional ballot, which you can, wipe your tuchus with. Now 16.7 million people won't show up and be told you can't vote. Some re-registered, some are dead, some have moved, but about half are wrong. And so I just issued a report for the ACLU of Georgia. We went through the list that the Republican Secretary of State just to purge the voter rolls there of about 1/3 voters. And we determined that we're not guessing, we went through every single name, obviously major computers help, 198,351 voters were illegally removed from the voter rolls. And if you see that film at my website, The Purged, one of the things you'll see at the opening is at that point, a 92-year-old woman just as she's being thrown out of a polling station in Atlanta. And this 92-year-old woman had been voting at the same polling station named Christine Jordan for 50 years, or she was trying to vote for a 50th year. They removed her. Why? They said she'd moved. So I went to her house that they said she'd moved out of, where she'd lived for nearly her entire century of life. And there on the wall are pictures of Martin Luther King. And I said, "You knew Dr. King?" She says, "That's my cousin. He came here for dinner after the sermons at the Ebenezer Baptist every Sunday." This is the woman that they removed for not, they said that she left Atlanta, and there she was. But of course, she was attempting to vote while black all over the nation. So now, how do I know that 198,000 people exactly are removed from the voter rolls of Florida? 198,351, because they said these people moved, just like King's cousin. Now, if you move from Atlanta, hey, you can't vote in Atlanta. You can't vote in Georgia if you've left the state. But we are guessing. First of all, I went to the place that tends to know where you live. It's called the post office. You can actually hire the post office's special consultants who keep track of where you live and move to. And we hired them. It's a company called Merkle. And then we hired other people who know where you live. Guess who knows where you were last Thursday at 2 p.m.? Yes, Amazon, Google, eBay, and a couple others. We hired their experts to say, would you go through this list and see who's moved? And they gave us literally the list. I gave that to the ACLU, and I gave that to the Secretary of State, said, put these people back on. And he said, I'll get around to it maybe a couple Tuesdays from now. Why? I said that I can't even guess. Now, understand, this is the same state when Brian Kemp was Secretary of State in 2018, running for governor. He wiped out the voting rights of 250,000 voters illegally. Caught him then, but it then exploded out of Georgia to Wisconsin, to Michigan, North Carolina, all over the country. 30 states started mass purging voters on grounds that they had moved. I fly to Milwaukee just before the shutdown. They're about to remove over 100,000 voters there for moving. Now, who are they? One was Saquana Taylor. You'll see her in our film, and you'll meet her in How Trump Stole 2020, which, by the way, if you go to my website, you can download the audiobook for free right now. Saquana Taylor, they said, had moved out of Milwaukee. And so I said, why are you voting in Milwaukee? It's a crime. What are you doing? You go to jail for that. She says, I didn't move out of Milwaukee. I said, prove it. She says, well, look behind me, because I was at a government building. Your name's on the wall. Milwaukee County Supervisor. That's who they said left Milwaukee. Now, how does that happen? Well, she also happened to be attempting to vote while black. So we took the list. We not only figured out exactly name by name who was illegally removed from the voter rolls, the big purge, or they wanted to remove. We also looked at the race. We took every census tract. How black is that tract? And then took every name of every wrongly identified voter mover. And it was almost an exact match. If you were wrongly removed, the chance that you are black in Milwaukee was about 90%. And now I didn't say 100% because there was one other group that was under major attack. Students in Madison, Wisconsin. Massive purge of students in Wisconsin. You know, it's not illegal to move dorm room to dorm room. But that's what they're doing when a kid moved their dorm room. They took away their vote. No, it's illegal. But you know, what are you going to do? You have to call the voter cops. Who's gonna, who are you gonna call? Dan Aykroyd's important political question. That would be Bill Barr. Those are the voter cops, the Justice Department, now an Injustice Department. So you got to do it on your own. And I will say we had some success in Wisconsin after I identified that this purge list was phony, racist garbage. Believe it or not, the bipartisan Board of Elections, since the Democrats have taken over that state, refused to purge these voters, even though it says that they must by law, a law passed by the Republican legislature. So that's all in court, but these votes have been saved for this election. That's why I don't think they can steal Wisconsin this time.
And that was
again. Go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
That was because of your work that those votes were saved?
I think that my work helped. You never know. In fact, I don't want to say that they're saved. They're certainly saved for this election because they were able to use this information to say, we're not purging these people. This list is junk. And even though the law says we have to remove these people, federal law says you can't just throw people off because they're black or they're students,
Right.
and we have bad information that they've moved. So, but on the other hand, in many other states like Michigan, now Michigan Democrats have taken over the executive there, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the governor, and but they are they've done nothing to return voters to the voter rolls in Michigan. So you had this massive problem. That's what this film that I put out today with from the DiCaprio family produced today to talk about this mass racist purge of voters. The Democratic Party doesn't talk about it. The media doesn't talk about it. So here I am. I have to talk about it, and you're talking about it. Thank you.
Well, we'd maybe be able to show you a film if that's all right with you at the maybe at some point at the end of
Yep.
of our discussion. I've got it up here on YouTube. If I can share the screen, we'll do that. But Craig, let me ask you a couple of questions. One,
Sure.
who is doing this? Is this the local Republican parties, the Democratic parties? Is it only the Republicans who do these tricks?
Well, there's well, now you're getting to the plural of tricks. But let's start.
Well,
The purge
purging,
is generally-
caging, spoiling, tossing, rejecting the ones. Are those still the ones they're doing? The ones
Oh yeah, and they've
and
got,
are
and
there
they've got
more
new
now?
ones.
Yeah.
But I have to say that that the GOP is a specialist at the purge operation. That's the biggest one because you can wipe out since 2000. Now remember what happened in 2000. Just to remind people, when I was with the Guardian and BBC Television, I went to Florida and uncovered that before the election, which George Bush won by just 537 votes in Florida, that made him president. They gave him Florida and made him president. But before he won by 500 votes, I discovered that they had removed 58,000 voters illegally, almost all of them black. And I'm not guessing about their race because it says in Florida voter rolls at the time, BLA next to the name of every black person. So I wasn't guessing. That's what we've discovered. Since then, we've had a law, the Help America Vote Act, which required every state to computerize their voter rolls, make it easy for the GOP or anyone else to just, with a flick of a switch, remove hundreds of thousands of voters at a time. 1/3 voters in Michigan, 100,000 in Wisconsin, 200,000 illegally removed in Georgia, and so on and so on. So that's mostly the GOP because it's a very good way to get rid of people of color, young people. In other words, and when I say people of color, blue, they vote blue. Now, am I telling you that Democrats don't play games too? Oh my God. In fact, in How Trump Stole 2020, I have a chapter called California Riemann. And I used to teach statistics, and I have to tell you, I went through the numbers, and even it was just breathtaking. I work with the California poll on these numbers. Bernie Sanders was shafted out of 553,000 votes, over 500,000 votes in this last primary, done by the Democratic Secretary of State, who was pulling a Catherine Harris or Brian Kemp. He was heavily involved in the supporting Joe Biden, and he's running the election. A guy named Alex Padilla, who is like, the nation's vote thief in chief by numbers. Democrats by numbers are worse. Okay. And Padilla sent out over 3 million ballots without Bernie Sanders' name on it. Like that? 3 million ballots without Bernie Sanders' name. Now, how do you do that? I don't have to go through all the details. Read the book. It's called California Riemann. There's a legal way he was able to pull this off. But this is the games that are being played. So the Democrats play the games too, but they're not anywhere as good as the Republicans. And the Democrats do almost all their dirty in primaries. The result is that the same voters who get screwed by the Republicans are the same voters who get screwed by the Democrats. They go after progressive, young voters of color. And so both parties go after these same voters. As we saw in Michigan, one of the reasons why Hillary lost Michigan by just 10,000 votes out of 5 million is abandonment of black voters by the Democratic Party there, which continues on. I mean, I have to tell you that the Attorney General, the Democratic Attorney General of Michigan, did not want my foundation to list, or the ACLU or Black Voters Matter that I've been working with, to list the names of people illegally purged from the voter rolls. Ask me why. I don't know. Fear of a black party? I can't tell. But they didn't want me literally saying, you have lost your vote. You better re-register now. And one thing, by the way, I don't want to overly discourage people. In Michigan, you can actually, if you do show up and find yourself purged, and in Wisconsin, you can register the day you go in to vote. So even if you are purged, but it's very difficult because you have to have the right ID and you have to have proof of address. And you'll love this in Wisconsin, Joe. In Wisconsin, you can't use your most student IDs can't be used for voting. They passed a law 2 weeks, and they implemented it 2 weeks before the 2016 election, a change in voter ID law in Wisconsin. You have to have a photo voter ID, but you can use your gun permit to vote. You can use your license, but you can use your gun permit to vote. But God forbid you try to use your student ID to vote. That's 182,000 students in the University of Wisconsin disenfranchised like that. In addition, black voters in Milwaukee, according to the University of Wisconsin study in the book, according to the University of Wisconsin study, 50,000 African Americans were immediately prohibited by voting because, you know what? Yeah, they could have used their driver's license, but guess who doesn't have driver's licenses? People who don't have cars. And that means people living in apartment buildings in urban areas, use public transportation, low-income people. In other words, black folk and Hispanics and students. And they lost 50,000 African-American voters. They lost over 100,000 students. And Trump wins Wisconsin by 22,000 votes. These are the games that are being played. Unfortunately, sometimes the Democrats protect you. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're the ones who are actually taking away your vote. So you protect your vote. Don't expect anyone or any party to do it for you.
So the fact that the Democrats do it in the primaries and the GOP in the general elections, is that why we don't hear the Democrats or the Republicans complaining about this, or their medias, the Democratic and Republican media? Why is it only you, Greg Palast, basically, who's making such a ruckus about this completely scandalous?
Okay, wait a minute. It ain't just me. If it were just me, I would just curl up in a ball and cry. Well, I do that anyway, but I have to. That's how I get through the end of the day. It's that or drinking. Well, sometimes it's both. But I got to tell you that the list in Michigan and in Michigan, Georgia, Wisconsin, that was put out for the Black Voters Matter Fund. Latasha Brown. These are great on the ground operatives. I work a lot with the Reverend Jesse Jackson. We defeated one nasty little purge system, which we could talk about, called Crosscheck. The ACLU put out my report in Georgia. So I get ACLU, I get Black Voters Matter, I get Operation Rainbow Push. And I should say that it's ACLU of Georgia. That's important because it's headed by an African-American woman, Andrea Young. Thank you, Andrea. And we do have media. But generally, what makes you unusual, Joe, is I don't get a lot of pale-face media. Even when I'm on like MSNBC, I was a regular with Joy Reid. And I used to go into the Universal Studios for MSNBC and say, so what about the pale-face host? So what we're talking about is apartheid media and apartheid voting. And it's not about parties. It still goes back to that same American disease called racism.
Let me turn it over to Elizabeth. I have one more, though, before I do that. Is there something fundamentally different about this election because of the pandemic? Lots of people have voted in person already, so they would have already discovered they've been purged. Isn't that right? Are we getting an earlier look at what's going on because of the?
Yes. In fact, actually, one thing you should note, for example, when you see these long lines, and where do you see the long lines? Oh, there's long lines in Georgia. No, there are not long lines in Georgia. There are not long lines in Milwaukee. There are not long lines in Louisville. What you are seeing is long lines in Black neighborhoods. You didn't see long 5 hours lines in white neighborhoods, rarely. Okay, so what's going on here? Once again, it's apartheid systems of voting. And what we were finding when we were talking to people in Georgia is that half the people standing in line, and it was roughly, this is not scientific. We just, grab people, and they all said the same thing, including Andrea Young's husband. I didn't get my ballot. Okay, and there's two reasons not to get your ballot for mail-in. So you're stuck in a several hours long line. Number one, you've been purged. And if you're purged, It probably means that you're black or you're young or you're Hispanic, or by the way, Asian Americans are a new target too. So if you're a voter of color, you're young and you've been purged, so you don't know why you didn't get your mail-in ballot. Well, the answer is you're not a registered voter. So good luck. And in Georgia, you're SOL. You've waited 4 hours in line and they'll give you a provisional ballot. And the little old lady behind the desk says, oh, that'll count. Don't worry. Yeah. According to the government, the federal government, 925,000, just fraction less than 1 million provisional ballots were disqualified in 16. 1 million ballots thrown out. And we know from the MIT and Caltech studies that it's overwhelmingly African-American ballots, young people's ballots. Young people are the biggest victims of provisional ballot rejections. That's one. That's changed. The other is mail-in voting. Okay, I've said for 12 years now, don't go postal. And by the way, anyone who hasn't mailed in their ballot yet, for God's sake, don't. Okay? And because you won't get protection, by the way, from the Democratic Party. That's for sure. And if you haven't mailed in your ballot, don't. So first of all, according to MIT, 22% of mail-in ballots never get counted. That's 1 in 5. That's horrendous. And part of it is that about half the people who ask for absentee ballots don't get them. I mean, let's say, excuse me, half of that number, about 10% of people who don't get absentee ballots, 10% of the people who ask for absentee ballots, sorry, I got to translate myself into English. 10% of people who ask for mail-in ballots don't get them. They just don't arrive. Maybe they've been purged, maybe whatever. Or they've moved down the street, or again, they're a student that's moved the dorm room and they didn't notify anyone, or they expect it to be forwarded. It didn't. The other is that 1 in 8 absentee ballots is challenged. You know those boogaloo schmucks in the Hawaiian shirts? Poll watchers, as Trump calls them. Remember, people have this wrong. They're not an intimidation army. You're not going to do a lot. You're not going to be able to intimidate voters. I haven't seen it done successfully yet. It doesn't happen. Okay. That's a MacGuffin. Don't worry about intimidation of voters. What you have to worry about, what we have a history of in America, is intimidation of the vote counters, Joe. That's going to be different this time. When they said stand back, stand by, he keeps saying poll watchers, poll watchers, poll watchers. He's trying to get these people into the polling stations to stop the vote count 2 ways. One is semi-legally, mass challenges of votes. I saw this in Michigan in 2016 when they started doing a hand count of uncounted votes in Michigan, paid for, by the way, by the Green Party, not the Democrats. And the Republican lawyers and hacks challenged every single Hillary Clinton vote. I mean, every one, which had 2 effects. It obviously cost her votes because they find some cockamamie thing, an extra mark on the ballot. Someone used a red pen instead of a blue pen. They added a middle initial when they signed their name. They forgot in a mail-in ballot, they forgot the inside envelope. That's called a naked ballot. That's 100,000 ballots lost to naked envelopes in just Pennsylvania. That's what's coming up this week. 100,000 disqualified mail-in ballots for that one gimmick. 100,000 will be lost minimum to postage due. In Ohio, by the way, you're going to need 2 stamps. Most people don't know that. Kiss your ballot goodbye. I had a radio host tell me proudly that he had already mailed in his ballot way in ahead. And just to make sure it's secure, he scotch taped the envelope shut, which means he just threw away his fucking ballot. Okay. And then that's how it works. 141,000 people, this is in 16, had their ballots rejected because of a challenge to their signature. Now, Joe, there's not 141,000 forgers in America. No one was arrested, but they threw out ballots for supposedly forged signatures. What I'm worried about is those intimidating boogaloo boys. And here's the last point on this. Go back to 2000. How come Bush is president? How come he won by 537 votes? The answer is there was a riot led by Roger Stone. It was called the Brooks Brothers riots. They had consultants and lawyers and his gangsters,
John Bolton,
his highly paid thugs, go into the Miami-Dade clerk's office where they're trying to count the votes and stop the vote count by going berserk, threatening to tear the place up. They stopped the vote count because they were scared. The next day, Catherine Harris, the Republican actress who was Secretary of State and also head of the Bush for President campaign, can you imagine? only in America. She said, that's it. No more counting. I declare Bush the victor. I'm worried this time that Roger Stone has been let out of prison for one reason: to create 20 Brooks Brothers riots. He's a member now. He's an official member of the Proud Boys and one of their leaders. And what I'm worried about is that we'll have many Brooks Brothers riots, except they won't be wearing Brooks Brothers suits. If you've seen these guys, I have pictures of them with their Nazi swastikas, tattoos, and the whole thing. I've been down there. I've been with the Proud Boys. And in fact, we have someone embedded with them right now. If they start breaking things up, they're told, imagine Roger Stone tweets, there's 10,000 ballots from Venezuela in the Tallahassee, Maine post office. How quickly will that post office burn down? How quickly? And they won't be wearing, Brooks Brothers suits. Believe me. I have photos of these guys. Our guy, Zach, has the photos of these neo-Nazis nearly beating a school teacher nearly to death with iron bars and bats. And so that's the type of poll watching that we might end up with in this election. I'm very, very concerned because of the mass number of mail-in votes. The chance, if they decide to create mayhem, the chance those votes will be counted is pretty damn slim, Joe. Joe Biden got up at the debate and said, don't worry about your mail-in ballot. It will be counted. Joe, you're going to be a pretty busy guy opening up 6 million ballots in Florida, and you've got 11 days to do it. 11 days to do it, which you can do if no one challenges those ballots. But do you really expect that? We will see. I don't know. I pray that we don't have violence, but violence is the key to Trump's reelection.
So Bolton will be in a Hawaiian shirt this time. John Bolton, who showed up in the Brooks Brothers. And none of the rest of us could wear Hawaiian shirts, and they've ruined it for us. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Greg. I was just wondering if you've also looked at the ballot counting, the voting machines themselves, as well as the purging of voters from rolls. And what did you find if you did?
Well, what I found, I'm not worried about computer voting. There's very little of that left, except in Pennsylvania. Hey. So there you go. But and that made a difference in 2016. I am concerned that we have machines that don't function and break down, and they miraculously tend to break down in African American areas. Like, for example, let's go back to 2016. I can only predict that Trump has already stolen 2020 because he stole 2016. Now, how did he win Michigan? In Detroit, Motown, 75,355 ballots were never counted. 75,355 ballots. That's official. And why does that happen? Because 87 voting machines, when I say voting machines, they're scanners. In Michigan and many other states, you vote by paper. People think, oh, if we vote by paper, it's all cool. No problem. Excuse me. You vote on a piece of paper, but it's read, that paper, by a machine, a scanner in most states. Now, the scanners break down. Well, big deal. And here's why who cares? Because there's another machine which is fantastic, rarely breaks down. It's called the human eyeball. So if a machine kicks it out because they broke down 87 machines again in Detroit, whose votes were those? But then someone has to say, well, let's count those ballots. And in 2016, the Democratic Party said, the hell with it. We don't care about those black ballots out of Detroit. That's not our voters. They vote for, we go to them every 2 years to harvest their votes, but, the hell with them. But the Green Party paid for that count, that it was stopped by a judge because only the Democratic Party had the right to count those ballots, because Jill Stein, you count the ballots 20 times, she would have never won. But the Democratic Party, when asked what does Secretary Clinton want to do, said, her lawyer said, we're just here to observe, which was, remember her campaign slogan. And but that's the problem, is the breaking down of these machines that simply lose the votes, don't count the votes, and it stops the count of the vote, holds up the count of the vote. That's the big danger. I'm not worried about some guy in a cave, flicking a switch, Lex Luthor saying, we're going to move Elizabeth Voss's vote from Howie Hawkins to Jeb Bush. No, I don't think. No, I'm not too worried about that. I'm worried about something much more serious, which is, and they call it vote spoilage. by the way, 1,913,000 votes to be exact were spoiled. That is cast and not counted in 2016. With the mail-in vote, 5 times that. We're going to lose at least 10 million ballots will remain uncounted. At least 10 million ballots will be disqualified, uncounted. Most of those will be mail-ins.
Given all of that, given what you've described, when you have the Democratic Party essentially cheating Bernie Sanders out of the nomination twice, then you have the Republican Party better able, it seems, to cheat in the general election. What do you say to voters who have just decided that it's too corrupt to participate in, that have just decided not to vote at all? How do you encourage people to vote anyway?
Okay. I once was asked, what do you do to inspire young people to vote who tend not to vote? I said, TRUMP. If you don't have an opinion about that, that doesn't mean anything to you. Screw you anyway. I don't care. If you're a schmuck who doesn't want to vote, then you deserve it. Then you have voted. You have voted. I mean, anyone. Look, it's. I was in Selma, Alabama. If you saw my film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, I crossed that bridge at Selma, which everyone should do sometime in their life, like any pilgrimage. And, Martin Luther King took people 50 miles from Selma to Montgomery. 4 people were murdered by the Klan on that march. I'm not asking you to march 50 miles. I'm not asking like John Lewis to almost get beaten to death. I'm just asking you to wait in line on early voting, fill out your if you have to mail in the ballot, fill it out carefully and walk it in. I'm asking you, I'm not asking a lot, but I'm not asking you to sit on your ass and be more precious than anyone else. They're stealing your vote because it's valuable. Don't steal your own vote. Someone tries to steal your car, you don't throw them the keys. I think it's nuts when people say, it doesn't matter, it doesn't vote, they're going to steal my vote anyway. In fact, that's one of the reasons why the Democratic Party hates me. They say when you tell people it's difficult to vote, you're discouraging them. No, I'm leveling with them. Some guy named Barack Obama, that's his alias, Barry Obama. He said in 16 in Philadelphia the night before the election, no one takes 15 minutes to vote. He just repeated that bullshit. Yeah, it only takes 15 minutes to vote when the Secret fucking Service clears out everyone else off the line so you can vote. It's 15 minutes to vote in Georgetown. Now he lives in Adams Morgan in Washington. That's very nice. Yeah, it's 15 minutes to vote. And in fact, I live in Hollywood, okay? I'm here with the Loveys. I vote right under the Hollywood sign. And, there's all this controversy about whether, crippled people can get a machine taken to their car so they don't have to crawl out of their car in Texas to vote. But the courts decide they still have to do that. The U.S. Supreme Court said, it's a Texas tradition to watch cripples crawl out of their car to vote. I'm here in Hollywood. And I can tell you that the Loveys pull up in their limousines and they carefully bring the machine to them and hand it to their chauffeur who hands it to them. And that's how they vote here in Hollywood. I kid you not. So, look, it's not 15 minutes to vote. I'll hats off to Michelle Obama, who did say, bring a chair, bring water, bring a sandwich, bring an umbrella, bring gloves, bring sanitizers. And I would add, bring 2 lawyers with you because it's, you got a problem. But don't discourage, don't be a schmuck. Vote.
A lot of our viewers are outside the U.S., Greg, so I just want to explain that there is no federal election system. It's each state runs their own elections for a national election.
Yes.
That might seem crazy to a lot of people outside the U.S., or even to some people inside the U.S. Now, if you were going to outlaw some of these practices, or let me start this way, are some of these practices like caging and spoiling and cross-check, are they outlawed by any states, or they would have to be outlawed by individual states since there's no federal election?
Well, there are federal restrictions. And if, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, when the voting police have, one of the things about vote theft is that it's a perfect crime because you take over the police department. The voting police, which are the civil rights division of the U.S. Justice Department, are under Torquemada Barr, right? Our so-called attorney general, the Grand Inquisitor. And so you're not going to get much justice there. There are laws, the National Voter Registration Act, which, you know, it says you can't just purge people left and right. These millions of purges, my lawyers, by the way, pointed out in court in Georgia, where I sued Brian Kemp, the Secretary of State there, successfully to open up his files. And, you know, I said, look, what you're doing is a violation of federal law. The Voting Rights Act is still there. It's still a crime to stop people from voting under false pretenses. We do have these laws. We have the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. The problem is that the voting police are in the hands of the voting thieves. And now the Supreme Court, which has become the White Citizens Council, it's the same thing. You know, so, and you already had, you know, Amy Covid Barrett is the one who's going to make a decision on any dispute over this election. I'm very, very concerned. In fact, I'll be putting out tomorrow with Tom Hartman a short film on the 3 ways that they can steal this election, even if they lose the vote in each state. You know, you've got some big problems. So do we have national laws? Yes, but we have to enforce them. Do we have crazy rules state by state? Yeah, that's the other problem. Now, I don't want to say that the solution is national voting laws, because God forbid if it's Bill Barr drafting them and, you know, Mike Pence is in charge of voting in America and it's all national elections. Well, you know, I mean, unless you know, there could require that you wear a white sheet to vote. Who knows?
Could you address Trump's been going on and on again about how there's fraud in mail balloting and they're dumping him in the dumpsters, and his name was on the ballots. And can you address what Trump's been talking about and how I'm sure he's mistaken?
I think it's maybe he is confusing with people who want to dump him in the dumpster, but not his ballot, but okay. In How Trump Stole 2020, I bring up fraud. You know, the fraud factory. I call it the hysteria factory. It's people make fun of it, but let's not make fun of it. But here's the stat. You're 540% more likely to get hit and killed by lightning than to cast a fraudulent ballot. So let's get that clear. I actually calculated it. The other is that, but why bring it up? I mean, why bring it up? The answer is, this is how you win an election, because you can say the ballots are fraudulent. Let's stop the vote count. Again, they did that. And it's not like it hasn't been practiced. They literally stopped the vote count in Florida. What people do not understand is that when Catherine Harris and the state legislature, by the way, this is important to know, because under Article 2 of the Constitution, we don't have a right to vote. Go ahead, try to find me voting in the Constitution. It doesn't exist. What we do have is we pick electors, but we don't even vote for electors. Your state legislature votes for electors. Okay, that's what's in the Constitution. The state legislature of every state has 100% absolute total control over which slate of electors is sent to the Electoral College. Now, in Florida, not only did Catherine Harris cut off the vote, while 178,000 ballots were left uncounted, mostly Jacksonville, Miami ballots, Democrats. The legislature passed a law in Florida in 2000, which said no matter what the courts decide, because the Florida Supreme Court said count all the ballots, just so you know. The Florida Supreme Court said count those ballots. And the legislature said we're changing the law, saying the ballot count stops now. And that they had 100% right to do, and it was endorsed by the U.S. Supreme Court when it was 5-4 crypto-fascists, and now it's 6-3 crypto-fascists. So good luck.
So all the places that you've been talking about where you've seen problems, except maybe Alabama, are swing states. Isn't that right?
Well, I concentrate, you know, on, it's an investigative reporter. Why mess around where there's no conflict and no chance of some serious, interesting violence that we can film. But look, so I look at Florida, Georgia, which is a swing state. All this, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona. We've been around quite a bit. And again, in the primary, in the case of primary, I investigated California because of the shenanigans.
Well, my question is this only, or is it only in swing states? Which, of course, for those viewers who don't know what that is, those are the states that are not necessarily going to go Republican or Democrat. They could swing either way, and those are the key states to win in the Electoral College. We know Biden's going to win California and New York and Virginia, and we know Trump will probably, Trump will win some of those middle western states and most of the southern states, but we don't know about the swing states. This is where we see these tricks mostly concentrated. Is that right?
Of course, because they put in, just like they put in their effort and money into stealing votes where it matters. But I should also say that, for example, the big purge operations happen in about 30 states, almost all of them GOP controlled. And so different techniques are used in different states. But like, for example, it's almost all the restrictive stuff is in GOP states, because that's where they can make the difference. The vicious ID laws, etc. California, because it's a one state, it's, the People's Republic of California, all Democratic. They have to use different types of tricks to bend the primaries, but it is mostly those GOP states, and of course they put their effort into the swing states.
By the way, did Joy Reid interview you about the Democratic Party's techniques in California during the primary? I didn't think so.
Discuss that.
I want to end.
In fact, by the way, the only paper that covered the theft in California was The Guardian. I was investigating for The Guardian in California. So across the water, I have to swim to Britain or to France to do my reports. To be on mainstream, to be on your top of your nightly news. So I was BBC, etc. But I just got, it was very strange to be reporting from abroad on elections in my own country. So I decided I'd come home.
Well, they have a US edition now, The Guardian, don't they? So
yeah,
I bet you didn't want to hear. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Elizabeth. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I bet Joy Reid wouldn't want to hear either about the 200,000 plus voters purged in Brooklyn in the 2016 Democratic primary either. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So,
well, look, I won't pick on any one broadcast or some of the, at least I've gotten on to discuss some of these issues and I will say I've had a lot of, again, African-American media has been pretty straightforward on no restrictions on reporting the facts. For me, you can tell by, I'm an investigative reporter, you tell by the hat. But for me, it's all about the facts. I mean, I make a lot of jokes, but it's, for me, it's the facts, ma'am. And those aren't partisan. And that's one of the things that upsets a lot of these outlets. They want me to be, they want me to join the party literally. And it's very difficult for me to do because you have Democrats with dirty hands too. Am I saying that both parties are the same? Absolutely not. That's a silly thing to say, and that's misleading. I don't say that it's all the same. It's not all the same. But don't ask, as I said at the beginning of the program, don't ask for political parties, Democrats or anyone else, to save your vote. You save your vote. In fact, go to gregpalast.com. You can watch these films on The Purge. You can watch, which is, by the way, thank you, Deborah Messing, for narrating, and Yvette Nicole Brown also. And but you can also type in condom and get the ballot condom for safe voting. And it's no, you don't slip it over your ballot, but you do follow the 7 rules to make sure your vote counts, that you stay registered and your vote counts. And again, if you've been purged, you're pretty much out of luck, except in certain states where you can register on the day you vote. Again, Michigan, Wisconsin, California, Iowa. And if you're listening right now, you just missed the final deadline for registering in North Carolina. There are about 8 states where you can register on the spot.
Now, Greg, there have been some Supreme Court decisions, U.S. Supreme Court decisions in the last week or so about states that want to give an extra 3 days to allow the votes to arrive. In other words, it can be postmarked 3 days after the election. Now, the court in one case, I think in Pennsylvania, allowed it, but they may revisit it after the election as well. It seems very messy to me. Could you explain that? What's going on there?
Well, yeah. So you follow a rule. So the court, so you have a governor or a court say, a lower court say, you can, if your ballot comes in after election day, it'll still count. And then 3 weeks after the election, they say, no, we changed our mind. Those won't count. That's what happened in Wisconsin, for example. 80,000 ballots were disqualified in the primary because they arrived after election day. And also, so it's very dangerous. Don't assume that any of these rules giving you a little extra slack are going to stand. In Wisconsin, for example, the governor said you don't need a witness you don't need a witness to sign your mail-in ballot. In 8 states, you got to have a witness sign your ballot, or in Alabama, it's 2 witnesses or a notary. Okay. Crazy crap. So the lower court said, no, you don't have to have a witness signature. It's dangerous in the middle of a COVID crisis. And then after the election, they said, no, those ballots won't count that didn't have the witness signature. So be very careful with that. The other thing that what I'm worried about with the court's decisions right now, they all are going in the same direction. States' rights, state control over voting is in charge. And that's very dangerous precedent. I think that it's very strategic. Roberts is a really strategic little monkey. And he is, by what he's doing is he's voted with the right wing on certain cases involving voting procedure and with the liberals on certain procedures. Why? In all cases, the continuing strain is it's up to the states. So he knows when push comes to shove, the states like Florida and Georgia and those states and the legislatures of Michigan and Wisconsin, that they may do some crazy shit, and the court will say, as they did in 2000, it's up to the state. And the state, it doesn't, don't forget, once again, even if, now in the case of Florida, they had a nice fig leaf that they stopped the vote when Bush was down to just 500 vote margin. If he could have lost by 20,000 votes, the legislature said, well, we don't trust those votes. It's fraudulent. That's, by the way, the reason for Trump constantly screaming fraud, fraud, fraud. They could say, well, we're not going to count the mail-in votes after, say, Thursday. Everything, any vote past Thursday is fraudulent. And that's completely up to the state legislature. And the court's decisions in the last couple of weeks are indicating that whatever crazy shit these legislators do, that's it. You're stuck. Any other questions?
All right. Yes, I have one more. We're going to decide to put the link, embed your video, your new film that you released today on our website underneath the video of this. So everybody goes to Conservative News to watch this or watching it now. About 10 minutes after, we'll have that ready. So I want everybody to see that rather than try to show it right now. Yeah, this is a question just about definitions, and maybe we should have started with this, but we've talked about purging, and I think you talked about spoiling, but some of the others, caging is when you move addresses, even if you go overseas.
Caging is, what they do is they send you, it's illegal, but that doesn't stop them. In 2004, I caught Karl Rove and his flunky, a guy named Tim Griffin, who's now Lieutenant Governor of Arkansas. And what they were doing is they were mass mailing first class or sometimes certified letters to Black and Hispanic soldiers like the Jacksonville Naval Air Station, to Jewish voters in Florida who are snowbirds, and they'd send them a letter in August, and they're up north, the elderly of Zion. They were going after them. Then they were also going after students at historically Black colleges, sending them letters while they're on summer vacation. The letters, of course, come back undelivered because they say do not forward. They come back undelivered, and they challenge the voter, saying that these people are voting from ghost addresses. These people don't live at these addresses. That's called caging, and it is against the law. That doesn't stop these people. That's how one of the keys to George Bush's reelection in 2004, and that was directly organized by Karl Rove, and he knows it because I've got his emails, baby. I've got your emails, Karl. You want to come and get them? You want to go over them with me? I'm standing by.
What is tossing? How is that different from
tossing? Is like spoiling. Well, tossing is saying tossing people out of the voting station for things like ID, etc. So again, we have these crazy ID laws. Gun license, yes. Student ID, no, in Wisconsin and Texas.
What about prestidigitizing?
Oh, that's your computerization games. Most of it is not through games with the software per se, but it is games where the machines break down. They don't give you the passwords. They unplug them. They put sensitive voting machines in humid areas in poor neighborhoods. Wow. So what happens is like Diebold once said, when machines broke down in Georgia in low-income areas, they said, well, these machines weren't made for humidity. Well, what do you think Georgia weather is? But it's, again, in the white areas, it's literally in country clubs, in golf courses, nicely air-conditioned. But then in low income areas, it's in these places where you have problems literally physically operating the machines. They know what they're doing.
What they're doing. It's not an accident. What about cross-check? It has to do with moving people over state borders on buses, isn't it? Something to do with that?
Yeah, well, that's what they're saying. Okay, so cross-check. And if you see the little 13-minute film, The Purge, I go to the Secretary of State of Michigan, the Republican at the time, that was after the 2016 election. And they had removed tens of thousands of voters on the grounds that they were voting in 2 states or registered to vote in 2 states. Well, that's a lot. There's a lot of people committing the felony crime of voting twice. This is a system created by Chris Kobach of Kansas, or if you don't remember the name, just think KKK. Chris Kobach, Kansas, created this list, he said, of double voters. And in Georgia, and now no one, by the way, our great media in America, no one asked for this list of double voters. I did. By the way, they turned me down. I sued. I got them. I also got some through the back door. By the way, anyone has confidential documents, go to gregpalast.com, contact. I'll protect you as much as I can. And so I got these lists. And who are these guys? Okay, in Georgia alone, 567 guys named James Brown. They said it voted twice. You know what? They found a James Brown in Motown. They found a James Brown in Baltimore. It's hard to imagine that James Brown's all over the damn place. So they removed all these James Browns in Georgia, and then they sent the list up to Michigan, and they removed the James Browns in Michigan. So I confronted they were shocked when they saw that I have the lists, right? So I have the lists, and I'm saying, okay. And I says, you'll see in the film that we just put out in The Purge, it's only a few minutes long. It's worth your time. He says, I said, isn't there a problem? He said, we're using the cross-check list aggressively. I said, I see the aggression. But I said, now let's see the truth. Look at this list here. I've got your list. Look at all these people named Michael Brown. Michael Brown, James Brown. So does that seem like a problem to you? By the way, it's James Thomas Brown, supposed to be the same voter as James Edward Brown. What? Okay, now. And I said, by the way, what color do you think Brown is? What color is that voter? He says, oh, well, I know some white Browns. I said, oh, it's okay then. That's a trick. And so that's cross-check. Cross-check.
Right, Greg, let's end with probably something you don't want to do. A prediction. Are we going to learn on Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning who the winner is? Will it be a wide enough margin to avoid a dragged out process with violence, possibly, et cetera, et cetera?
I have no idea. One thing I am is I'm just the facts, man. I investigate facts, what's happened. I'm not very good at investigating into the future. Am I predicting? Could there be violence? Yeah, they're preparing for it. Could there be a long count? Absolutely. That's what they want so they can cut it off. Because when you have Republicans voting on the day, and then you start counting the mail-in ballots over a week, they can just pull a Florida 2000 and just say, vote's over. Remember, the presidency has to be unlike other elections, because we don't vote for president. And as I say, we don't even vote for the electors. Your legislature does. So we vote to advise the legislature to pick electors to choose the president. To do that, you have to certify the vote. The legislature has to say, we certify this slate of electors. They have to do that in time for the information to get to Washington by horseback. Remember, this is Constitution is not exactly a youthful document. In fact, this is a decrepit piece of shit, but we'll have that for another discussion later. If it weren't for the Bill of Rights hanging off it like sad testicles, it would definitely not be a document we'd want to keep around. We wouldn't want to show it to our children or scare the dogs, especially when it's being interpreted by Amy COVID Barrett. So I can't predict, but if it goes to Amy COVID Barrett, you're screwed. If the Boogaloo Boys show up and start poll watching, we're going to have some ugly results and bloodshed. I'm hoping none of this will happen. Obviously, what prevents it is an overwhelming vote for one candidate or the other. That's the only thing that's going to stop it, where there's just no grounds, and even the Proud Boys will lose their juice.
Well, the polls show Biden is instead to have an overwhelming victory, but so did the polls say Hillary Clinton would as well. So
yeah, remember 538, those geniuses.
Yeah.
If you remember, 538 said that Hillary Clinton's chance of winning was 97% the morning of the election. Trump's chance was 3%. She was winning Wisconsin by 6% by the polls and by the exit polls. So you can't, oh, Trump is right. You can't go by the polls because the polls don't figure the purge. The polls don't figure the game. The polls, I've never seen a pollster, an exit pollster, and I've seen what these guys do. Not one of them said, by the way, you said who you voted for. Were you handed a provisional ballot? Do you know if your vote was spoiled? How could you? You know who you pulled, who you punched the card for, but you don't know if it was ever counted, right? And again, millions of spoiled ballots, 1.9 million directly spoiled in-precinct ballots, spoiled 3 million mail-in ballots down the tubes. These are in 16. It's all going to be worse this year, much worse. But you can't steal all the votes all the time. The steal, by the way, I'm talking about millions of votes, but it still comes down to 4%, maybe 5%. This year, maybe 6% because of mail-in voting problems. That's it. If you can win, as long as you can get that margin over 6% in the swing states, it's going to be clear.
The Economist magazine gives now Joe Biden 99% chance of winning, even 3% better than Hillary Clinton. Greg, thank you so much. Where will you be on election night, Tuesday night? Where will you be? In a polling station somewhere, seeing what's going on, or at home?
Well, hopefully not in prison or kidnapped with tape over my mouth with, the 3%ers and the oath keepers.
At least for a week, they'll shut you up, right? And then they'll let you go. So, no, but we're having a live election coverage, and we're having an open forum. We're going to invite you if you want to pop in, have something to say.
Please invite me. I'm doing several, but look, to me, and by the way, Consortium News is very close to my heart because of the great late Bob Perry. He was my hero. And he's the guy who told me when I first began as an investigator, before I was an investigative reporter, I was an investigator. He says, there's these guys that no one's ever heard of, the richest guys you've never heard of, you got to investigate, called the Koch brothers. So Bob Perry, if I could only be a third of the journalist he is, I'd be a very happy man. So thank you, Consortium News. Thank you, Bob Perry.
And thank you, Greg Palast. That was Greg Palast speaking about voter suppression. And I want to thank Elizabeth Voss, Craig, our audience, Kathy Vogan, our executive producer. Until tomorrow night, when we have Jill Stein, Mike Gravel, Chris Hedges, and Rick Wolf to discuss the election. We're having a roundtable tomorrow. This is Joel Lauria saying goodbye for CN Live.
Get out your notebook. There's more.